Hey, welcome to the Mysteries and RPGs panel. One of the last panels we're doing at PaizoCon, so there may be a little bit of punchiness going on, but we'll do our best. I'm James Jacobs. I'm the narrative creative director for Pathfinder and my mysterious
And
companion.
yes, and I'm Jason Keeley, senior developer on the Pathfinder rules and lore team. And this is actually my first panel of PaizoCon 2023. So I'm more eager to go than punchy at this point.
Yay! That's good to know. That's good to know. All right, so we've done similar panels to this in the past, like horror and RPG, where we
Mhm.
basically talk about how do you do a specific genre as a RPG. And I was thinking we didn't want to do horror again because we've done that a couple of times. And the idea of like doing let's do mysteries. And we got
Mhm.
Jason back in the holster at Paizo. Yay!
Yep.
So let's bring him in and we can talk about how mysteries work. So um, I guess let's start out by talking about some fun mystery content we've done in the past or present, or for Starfinder or Pathfinder, and Jason, kick us off with some maybe some Starfinder stuff, some mysterious Starfinder
Yeah,
content.
some mysterious Starfinder content. Well, one of the reasons you may have brought me on is because a while back I wrote a Starfinder adventure called the Chimera Mystery, which is the first volume of the threefold conspiracy adventure path. And that introduces sort of a bit of a locked door, just a missing person kind of mystery on a spaceship out in the drift, and you've got to figure out and solve that, and it leads to bigger and bigger mysteries as the AP goes on. But in that, I also wrote an article just about I think it's just titled "Mystery Adventures," which is about sort of this very topic. So if you got that, you can take a look at that and get some good notes. But we'll give you all the highlights of what you need to know for that today. But more recently, and Adam, if we could see that first image, I want to mention this the Drift Crisis case files. Which is this is the lovely cover where you are members of a sort of a private detective agency, sort of getting cases. It's like there's three cases in the book that can be played, as one campaign or just sort of separately, varying levels, and they're good for hunting. It's all the sort of classic noir tropes in this one, I think. You got a little missing person, you got a little bit of a missing item that you got to track down. It's got some good fun in it, and that's the more sort of the most recent Starfinder mystery that you can go check out. Uh, James, what about the Pathfinder stuff? Oh, you're muted. I should probably.
Normally, don't mute, but I was drinking root beer. And pro tip
There
for
you
when
go.
you're doing seminars: don't drink carbonated beverages when you're on stream because you're going to be burping the whole time. So anyway, I'm back. I'm professional
Back.
again. Um, Yeah, the thing with mysteries that I really love about in RPGs is it's a way to get your players like involved in the storyline that isn't necessarily about you. Like, will I or won't I succeed at rolling an attack roll or something
Mhm.
like that? They got to engage their brain, and you can see here I got Wall of Call of Cthulhu stuff all here. It's a genre that I just love playing. The most recent mystery thing that I've been working on lately is the upcoming Adventure Path Season of Ghosts, which is coming out
Mm.
later this year in October. That's a 4-part adventure path where it's kind of horror themed, set in the nation of Shenmin, and there's a lot. Not only are there a lot of like murder mystery things that your characters are going to have to untangle and dig through and sort through, but the adventure path itself has got a lot of mystery in it. There's some plot twists and the like that I'm not going to spoil here because they're pretty
Yeah.
intense. But each of these 4 volumes, you're going to be uncovering a kind of a big surprise that carries you into and
Hmm.
informs the next adventure they're going on and going on. So it's kind of a fun way to build this escalation of you solve one question, and that just makes a bigger question arise. Like, okay,
Yeah.
we found the mysterious killer in this one, but they work for a mysterious conspiracy, and then you solve the conspiracy and you figure out, oh wait, this conspiracy is being fueled by something from another planet or another reality, and it's just sort of this growing complication. So that brings me into, I mean, if we can get that next image, that's sort of the type of thing when we're building adventures. It's like trying to
Yeah.
sort through all the different clues and tie in all of the different things together, so that you have an adventure that player characters can navigate and solve. And one thing that is really, really tricky is you don't want to make your mystery so complicated, that there's
Right.
no way for the players to basically figure it out. Hi, Bigby. That
That's my
you
dog barking in the background. Sorry.
that you don't want to make your adventure so complicated that they'll never figure it out. One thing that I really like doing with mystery adventures is setting up, a bunch of different potential ways for things to go forward. Like I'll have the initial mystery and I'll have the final solution of the mystery. And then there'll be like two or three different ways you can navigate to that solution. You can follow up on like, so let's say it's a murder mystery. You can follow up on like
Right.
investigating the different murder sites and then like finding clues at each one of those. Or you can do something along the lines of like speaking with the dead or something like that. They'll have different avenues you should get to. One thing actually that I found works really well, and it's kind of tricky, is if you present the initial mystery and you know basically how it's going to end up, you
Mhm.
just turn the player characters loose on there and they start making up clues and finding connections you didn't realize, and then you can say
True.
like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, that's true. The window was left open and it's on the third floor. So maybe the villain did fly. Maybe you should go outside and look around for clues like that. And you initially had it planned like, oh, it's just a dude who snuck in, who hid in the closet and snuck out in the middle of the night. But this player character is like got up this thing with flying. It's like, okay, now the murderer is going to be like a Mothman or something that can fly around and all of that.
Mhm.
And in the background, you're changing the nature of the villain that you're going to eventually reveal to the party. But when you do, if you do it tricky enough, and you build off of what the player characters have been kind of building their own solution to it all, the ultimate result is really, really satisfying to the players because they feel
Mhm.
like, oh, we figured this out because we're smart and we picked up on your super weird, obscure clues, and it all ended up being right where it was going to be. And you're like, yeah, you guys really knew what you were doing. And that
Yeah.
sort of play really makes it easy for you to build a mystery adventure because you basically only have to come up with, the initial mystery and then have just a big stack of stat blocks and monster books handy as you need. So, what about you, Jason?
No,
What's your
I
favorite way
think
to set up?
I do think it's important to stay flexible, like you mentioned, for when you have it, because I guess I'm a little more of a planner when it comes to mysteries, because I like to present kind of impossible situations, and having an idea of how they're done, because it's sort of like working backwards from what the mystery is, and then working that to like, oh, you find someone who's dead in a garden, but there's no footprints around them whatsoever where there would be, because the soil's really soft, and there's no visible wounds on them whatsoever. It's like, oh well, that's because they fell out of a hot air balloon, right, and just fell into the, or like someone, I ran it was more of I wouldn't say it was called Cthulhu style, but it was set in the sort of 20s and 30s kind of like time period in England, where it was like a during a sort of a magician stage show where they meant to like appear, step into one uh casket and then immediately step out of another one that's like 20 feet away. But when that happens is the magician does that and then falls out of the other casket dead. And you're like, that kind of stuff is sort of present that, oh, the players are there when the murder happens, right? That's always a great to sort of then again sort of let them loose, see what they get and stay flexible. But generally, what I like to do is do a sort of a relationship map from who the victim is to a bunch of suspects and how they're related and how they could all maybe have a motive or an opportunity or a means to do the murder or do the crime, right? And draw lines around with them and who's connected to who. And then, a lot of these people, they have them have their own particular secrets, so that when a player is sort of like gets fixated on one character, they can be like, well, why are they all shifty? Oh, it's because they're embezzling money from their company and they don't want you to try to dig it any deeper, and that's why they're being evasive. They had nothing to do with the murder, of course. You just sort of uncovered another crime that had nothing to do with the main crime, but then that having that uncovered sort of provides that person with an alibi for the actual murder. So these sort of relationship maps that I like to draw out do look a little bit like Lem's conspiracy board, but you can always, again, sort of like you said, stay completely flexible on all that. If someone says, "Well, what if they did this?" and that sounds just as plausible or even more plausible than the thing I came up with, because I'm not. I've written a couple of mystery adventures, but I'm not like an experienced mystery novelist or anything like that, right? Um, so it might be better, and it might make the story better, and you can just sort of like look at your relationship chart and maybe erase a little line there, draw another line, or erase a note and draw another note in there, and then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's all great advice. Another thing too that I like to do is well, I mean, the whole concept of failing forward, I guess, is important to keep
Mm-hmm.
in mind for
Yeah.
mysteries too. And because one way you can crash your mystery adventure right to the ground is to have the key clue that players have to find
Yeah.
out be locked behind a skill check, and say, like, in order to find the missing key, they need to unlock the door. They need, say, a perception check. And if nobody makes that check, suddenly, you're stuck. I mean, a lot of the older Call of Cthulhu adventures have this issue where you have to make library checks to find these key handouts that then lead you
Oh
to new
yeah.
clues and down new pathways. And if nobody makes that check, then you kind of are in a case where it's like, well, nobody figured it out here. Spend another day in the library and roll again, and spend another day in the library and roll again until somebody finally
Yeah.
makes it a success. And that feels less like a mystery and more like, it's not as satisfactory. So
Yeah.
by failing forward, what I mean is, if the player characters succeed at something, obviously they'll get a clue. And if they succeed, I mean, the Pathfinder 4 degree of success works really well
Mm-hmm.
for this regard. If they're successful, obviously they get a big clue and a bonus going forward. If they critically succeed, maybe you allow them to skip a clue entirely or give them a clue early. If they fail, you should still give them that clue. Basically say that, well, you're not sure why this person is, dead with no visible signs of a murder happening, but there's a bloody hammer on the ground, and maybe the clue is, like, you got to go to the hammer store next. And so you won't the player characters won't know that this bloody hammer, killed the person, and they tried to hide the blood or whatever they did. But they'll still know to go forward. And then if they critically fail, that's where you could basically set it up like a false lead. That's a great place to put a false lead. Say something like, the bloody
Yeah.
hammer, that's obviously fake blood. Maybe you need to go to the fake blood store instead. But since critical failures in this Pathfinder system are relatively rare, you're not going to you almost are never going to have a situation where everybody in the party critically fails at this check. So at the very
Mm-hmm.
least, even if somebody fails, they can keep going forward. Um, what is there a similar sort of method you like using in your games, Jason? Like, maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
Starfinder or other games
Oh,
entirely, even.
just in general, like if there's not hinging on that single clue, maybe having like two or three different clues that people can find that all maybe lead to a sort of similar deduction, right? Or multiple paths to that one deduction, right? If you're talking about skill
Right.
checks, it's like whether or not is it perception to find a piece of missing information, or are you then sort of like got stealth and then sneaking behind someone to notice them doing something suspicious, or is it diplomacy to try to like talk to a neighbor or what have you who's witnessed something suspicious, and all of those paths might lead to the exact same clue or the exact same deduction. But
Mm-hmm.
it's handy that you have those multiple paths so that you can either do a fail forward or do it just sort of like, oh, you failed at this particular skill check. Maybe there's other skill checks you can check. Another way to sort of like stop that blockage of mystery is to do the thing that I believe Raymond Chandler used to say, is that when a mystery sort of bogs down, have a guy kick down the door with a gun. So um, it sort of lead to just to throw in an action scene, right? And while all the players are maybe sort of like getting a little, I'm tired of making these skill checks and I'm tired of trying to figure these things out, or maybe I'm getting a little distracted by one thing that isn't relevant whatsoever. You kind of can throw in an action scene. It's like the hired goons come in to try to kill you. And they're they when you defeat them, they have a bit of information on them, and they say, oh no, we were hired by this mysterious man who hangs out at this nightclub or whatever, or they're like like an industrial accident, like quote unquote accident happens, right? And the players are put into some sort of danger, and then they can sort of like, oh well, that seemed awful suspicious and inconvenient. Maybe that is a clue, and they can go check out. Oh look, hey, yes, this has been sabotaged, and here's a little like matchbook or something that leads you to that same nightclub or whatever. So there's different ways to sort of get to get players sort of back to not necessarily to the one solution, but to something that you know what's going on, and get them to a place where they can find something satisfying to continue to move on. Otherwise, like you said, it's just like, well, you're stopped for the day and you have to wait till tomorrow to do this, and it's not as interesting. You want to keep that narrative moving, right?
I think the interrupt the searching for clues with an action scene is actually a kind of a brilliant solution, honestly, because um, if you've got a situation where the players are trying to find clues and they keep failing, and they're the players
Yeah,
themselves are going to start getting frustrated, and by
exactly.
having the goons break in the door, suddenly you're saying, all right, well, suddenly you've taken so long looking for clues here that somebody's noticed, and now you got to fight. And once the
Yeah,
fight starts, you can just throw in some stats, and then things are going, and the players are now engaged in this new situation that's going on. And while they're all, thinking of what they're going to do on their turn, you as the GM have breathing room to start, like figuring out how are you going to do this and keep the
hmm
plot going forward. Maybe you are frustrated that they didn't find the hidden, envelope with the letter of, the next clue inside of it hidden in the bookshelf.
yeah,
And like you said, once they defeat these enemies and they search them because of obviously they want to, take their stuff, that's when they find that
yeah,
letter. And to the players, that doesn't feel like, a cheat. It feels like, oh, there was never really any clue here at all. And this whole, played out kind of the way it was supposed to. So that's a really, really good way to handle that sort of thing. Another thing, too, with mysteries is that you want to make sure, even when the player characters get to the end of the adventure or the final scene, etc., you want to make sure that there's sort of a way to kind of tie everything up, and you don't really want to do like the
hmm
the, the villain monologue type thing. But you were mentioning earlier, Jason, before we started here about the villain who explains what's going on.
yeah.
How do you do that?
It's a classic TV trope, and I sort of like have this third image that shows sort of you catching someone in the act, essentially of the next murder or whatever, or basically saying, yeah, finding the bloody knife on their person, and saying, yes, I did it, and I killed it, and here's why, and I do it again. Like it's such a classic thing that happens in a lot of mystery movies and mystery TV shows because audiences need that closure, right? And in a way, your players are part of you, and yourself are sort of part of this audience of this mystery in ways. So essentially, when the players have figured it out to their satisfaction, and maybe like accuse someone of a crime, and you're like, hey, that's pretty good enough. They've got sound reasoning. It could happen, and this is, or it's the person you thought it was going to be if you're uh, 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 haven't changed it, and you can say, yeah, they stand up. I mean, this could lead to another fight, right? This could be another action scene. They either run away and you've got to chase them. That's an obvious sign of guilt, right? Or they pull out a gun or a knife, a sword or whatever, and start stabbing and shooting, what have you. That's another obvious sign of guilt. You don't doesn't have to be necessarily like a monologue, but just sort of anything that sort of says, well, they're caught and they're going to try to one last desperate chance to get away or kill the people who found them. That is a pretty clear indication to the players you got the right person generally, right? You can always this can always throw in red herrings and extended mysteries and whatever, but for the most part, you want to have the culprit kind of being like eventually saying, "You got me, I did it," and so that the players can be like, "Yeah, we figured it out and we got them." And then you can get the chance to beat them up or take them to jail or what have you.
Yeah, yeah,
So I think it's important to have that resolution come into play eventually, so that again, like an audience it's the thing. It's like when you're watching Murder She Wrote and the person is like, yeah, I did it, and like if that person had just actually stayed quiet, the Jessica Fletcher has no real evidence on them, so they really they're just sort of digging their own hole. But it's a 45-minute TV show, and you need to have that closure.
yeah. It's important to wrap up those loose ends. One thing that I often do in an adventure, especially when I'm developing a long form adventure, like an adventure path or something like that, is I'll try to make sure at the near the not at the last encounter, but near the end in the final chapter, that there's an NPC or there's a library or there's some sort of like oracle or something like that that the player characters can find, and to reward them for
Mhm.
spending time exploring the area a little bit more. Build into that adventure, say like this oracle knows a lot of what was really going on, and rather than have them basically say this is what's going on and have it be like a bunch of box text, set that up as a resource that players can use to ask their questions. You don't
Hmm.
necessarily know as the GM what all the players are like, maybe confused by or still intrigued by, and having them say, well, I want to ask them about that. There was that weird green bird we saw trapped in the one room, and nobody ever figured that out. What was going on with there? And then you give them, a role, or whether it's, a perception or a diplomacy or whatever. And then you can either say, well, that was a false lead, or that was,
Hmm.
tying into like the green bird slasher that you encountered back in the third adventure. And it's kind of a way to just wrap things up into a nice, neat little package so that there's not like some sort of. So that when the players are going into that final encounter, they're not still like, well, we never followed up on that green bird clue. So that's I've
Right.
always
Yeah.
felt an important thing to include in there. Yet anything else you really wanted to cover in like mysteries? One of the things that we do want to do here as well is open it up to folks and do like question and answer stuff. Yet anything else you wanted to cover, Jason? Or
Yeah, well, while people are thinking of some questions, I want to sort of hit on a little bit of something that you mentioned is that obviously magic plays a big part in both Pathfinder and Starfinder, and that opens up a lot. A lot of people might say that, oh, well, magic makes mysteries mundane or trivial, right? And I don't think that's the case. I think you have to know that in a world in which this stuff exists, clever criminals, good criminals, who are going to be the ones you want to have your players face, right, are going to take that kind of stuff into account, right? They're going to have. There's always ways to sort of, not necessarily, but you don't want to necessarily block things outright, right? You can have like, if you're going to say, oh, the people have speak with dead. Well, they might go to the corpse and ask them who murdered you. Well, of course, the murderer was wearing a cloak or came from behind. So the victim never saw the murderer, but you should give some kind of. It shouldn't be a complete blockade there, right? There should be some kind of clue. Oh, I smelled a perfume. I heard a unique laugh or a bird song or something like that, right? To give them the next step, right? But that adding that magic, that like taking into account all the magic, you were mentioning oracles too, James. Like oracles speak in weird riddles oftentimes, so they might give you some information, but it's going to be cloaked in simile and metaphor and that kind of stuff.
mm-hmm.
So having magic as part of the setting is, I think, something you need to take into account, but not try to do a completely non-magic, not that to shut that stuff down because it's stuff that the players have invested their character in, and it adds it makes it more rich. It makes the experience richer.
Yeah, and especially since if you're building a game for your own group, and
Mhm.
you know what their characters are going to have access to, you
Exactly.
honestly should. So if you know somebody can speak with dead or commune with the stones or something like that, you should set it up so that the only way these clues can be discovered is if the player characters make
Right.
use
Yeah.
of their abilities. That way, the players come away with like, of course, no one solved this mystery because we were the ones that had the resources to
Right.
do it. So,
Yeah.
um, cool. So just as in this next image, which is one that I really like, where we've got our investigator looking into a mystery that is like what is the purpose of this 13-hour clock on the wall. There's a dead body here. There's all sorts of clues going around. I have questions.
Yeah.
So I assume everybody in
Multiple
the
questions.
audience has questions too. So yeah, let's go to that. Let's see here. And first of all, I'm going to mangle some of your Twitch handles and all that stuff. So Janet Extenicadist, for example. How do you handle mysteries where the answer is super set ahead of time because it's a building block for a later part? Is the answer just don't do that in tabletop RPGs, or is it stay flexible? How would you handle that sort of mystery, Jason, in a game?
Yeah, sure. Say you need the murderer to be the Baron, right? Because the Baron is part of a cabal of secret a secret society that's all throughout the country's nobility or whatever, right? You can set that ahead of time, and I think that's okay to sort of know who the murderer is. But if there are certain things that like you can't, but also stay flexible. The answer is both in a lot of ways. I am a big proponent of improvisation when I GM, and so when I do, mysteries are the one thing that I sort of plan out the most because I like them to be kind of like satisfying to me. improvising a mystery can be a little tricky because it sometimes ends up a little bit like, a bunch of loose ends that you didn't know were there, and oh shoot, and they don't tie up, and everyone is sort of like, yeah, it was fine, but whatever. But in general, I do a lot of improvisation. But you can say like, oh, the Baron did the murder, uh, but maybe the Baron has a secret shapeshifter or something like that. Like taking the sort of what James said earlier, like, oh, only the person who could fly or climb like a spider could reach the window to get into the locked room to murder the innkeeper or whatever. You can, and you had something else in mind that they just climbed up there with a rope, but some other clue some other detail that you weren't thinking about is picked up by the players, and oh, it had to be a flying person, and we got to you there's a lot of ways that you can still be flexible around a kind of quote unquote fixed point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Yeah. So, what do you think, James?
I agree. I think that if you're doing a full on campaign and you're the current mystery adventure is
Mhm.
just like this is just the adventure. I think that having a story planned out ahead of time, I think, is super important because you as the GM need to have a through line through this whole thing. If you're not doing something like
Yeah.
if you're doing a sandbox, then it doesn't matter. I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think staying flexible is the big thing for me. And even if um, you have to have that murderer be the Baron, and something happens in the adventure that plays out, like maybe the player characters get a crit on that Baron on some sort of Hail Mary arrow shot, bang, the Baron's
Right.
dead, and suddenly you're like, hmm. So, and that's where flexibility comes in. So maybe it's not the Baron, maybe
Yeah.
it's the Count, or maybe it's the evil merchant that they swindled earlier, or whatever. So, here's a fun
Hmm.
question though. How would you handle a secret role style murder like Clue, where one of the players could be the murderer? That's that's one that I don't really know how we would handle that in a published adventure, because to a certain extent that sort
Yeah.
of needs buy-in from one of the players, and that's tricky too. You got to really trust your party,
Tricky.
your table, and all the players need to
Hmm.
trust each other, because that sort of having a player plant in the group is a good. Every time, a lot of times I've tried that in my own gaming history. It's ended up with party strife and arguments and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
I think the best way to handle that is to play games specifically built
Hmm.
to portray that type of thing. I know there's a fair amount of RPGs that do that. Is any kind of mind, Jason? Or
Gosh, do any come to mind? That
well,
is a
there's that
good
party
point.
game Werewolf is the one that bumps into my
Well,
head
yes.
immediately.
Right. Yeah. You can go play Among Us.
Mm-hmm.
Is the answer to that. No. I'm sure there are at least one or two games out there. I mean, there's definitely board games out there that are that kind of thing. But there's got to be at least
I
one or
think
two sort of smaller games.
there was a game of Dread. I think I played at one point where, because when you play Dread,
Oh.
you start out and you have like your little sheet of character information, and so like you
Yeah.
as the GM could basically hand out like you are it's a murder mystery on a train. Say you're the conductor, you're the ticket taker, you're the engineer, you're a passenger,
Hmm.
you're a stowaway, and then all of those
Yeah.
things are in there. And one of those will say you're also the murderer, and then when you're playing the game, as you start going, everybody's looking for a clue, and with Dread, you resolve everything by taking a step out of like the Jenga tower to see if you or succeed or not. And in that case, you could have something on that piece of paper saying that if you are the murderer, then you at any point can knock the tower over to murder a player character that is onto you, and
That's
you know,
interesting. Yeah.
but you won't say it on purpose, like you will say like just subtly like screw it up if you're calling it, and then that'll be a signal to the GM that okay, suddenly this other character gets murdered or something like that. But again, that sort of thing I think really requires a lot of trust among the players to like be
Indeed.
able to handle the fact that this is a game and not actual people kind of betraying actual people.
And
Uh,
honestly, that
yeah,
that that kind of scenario isn't necessarily sustainable over. It's maybe for a night, for a one shot, or for like
yeah,
there's always it's a similar sort of thing where like when you have any kind of adventure and you want to have one of the players be secretly replaced by a doppelganger or a, a shapeshifter of some kind, right? You can sort of talk to the player and be like, "Hey, for a little bit," or they're possessed by a ghost, right? You want to like,
Right.
I'm gonna take you aside and tell you something secret, or give you a secret chat over Discord or something. Like, you're possessed by a ghost now. Be pretty much 90% normal, but like, you feel free to like do A, B, or C. But
Yep.
really, that's the sort of thing that will eventually come out pretty quickly. Players want to help each other generally, so that they will be like, we got to help save the person, or like, even the player playing the possessed person isn't necessarily going to be like, now I kill everybody, because that doesn't end to, it doesn't end in anything fun for the whole group.
Yeah.
So I mean, it again, yeah, very tricky. Something you need to kind of like, hey, ahead of time, like maybe in this scenario, you guys, something weird might happen with one of you, so uh, uh, telegraph it a little bit ahead of time, so that that sense of paranoia is actually there and actually heightens the effect. The game that I'm immediately just sort of came to mind was, of course, Paranoia,
Right.
which is a game
Right.
in which players kill each other all the time, but that's built into the thing. You have multiple clones that sort of can take over when you're done, right? And it's that becomes the fun of the adventure, and it's gonna, when you do something like this, it's going to override everything else you're doing for a little bit, right? The adventure in the dungeon is
Right.
going to take backseat to the fact that one of you is now, against the rest of the party.
Right. One thing that I found works pretty well. Again, you need a group of players that trust each other and are okay with this. And you want to not train wreck your entire campaign.
Yeah.
Is to go with the sort of doppelganger or aboleth replacement or whatever sort of plot
Hmm.
you want. I did this at one point in I was running Serpent Skull way back when, and Rob McCurry's
Hmm.
character got dominated by one of the creatures in secret. Nobody else
Hmm.
was around. He like snuck off and got himself
Mm.
dominated. And I took him aside and say, "Okay, you're dominated, so they want you to do this, this, this going forward." Uh, but eventually, the group is going to figure it out and be able to save
Yeah.
you. And every once in a while, I had like, I guess, a secret, like I'd rub my nose or tug my ear or something, and that would be a
Yeah.
indication to Rob that he could roll a new saving throw to escape this effect.
Oh,
And
great.
I told him, it's like, you have to follow the orders, but you're still fighting back, and
Hmm.
you can try to follow the orders in ways that maybe set up clues for the other players to figure out what's going on. And when he did that, I'd give him the signal or whatever, and he'd roll a save. And eventually, he made a save before people figured it out. But once that happened, it went from a case of, oh geez, Rob betrayed us, to, oh geez, Rob his character is a victim. We need to save him. And then that suddenly allowed Rob's character to come in, and once they rescued him, and give the next clues, like, oh, there was this. Remember 3 sessions ago, I fell asleep in that weird temple that we were exploring. While I was asleep, I was mind controlled by this ghost. We got to go
Right.
back there and fight the ghost. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you build? This is Divine Highland. How do you build that kind of flexibility that we were talking about into a published adventure? I'm not sure really you do. I think that's really where we have to lean on the GM. What
Yeah.
one thing that we try to we over describe what's going on. So like in most games, maybe this evil general is just somebody you encounter in room 7A, and you fight him and kill him and take his magic sword. But we will often give like a paragraph or two about that general's background and all that sort of information and
Hmm.
clues and stuff like that, so that if the GM does need to be flexible and maybe say, oh, the player characters accidentally killed the murderer and I still need a murderer to do things, they can go with that general and use that
Yeah.
information we gave them to go from there. But you have any ideas or suggestions there, Jason, aside from just lean
You
on the GM?
I mean, you can give the GM some short, brief sort of cues of how things that you can be flexible with. And is the murder? Did they find the murder weapon under the bed? No, they didn't. Well, then the murder weapon's hidden in an event. Oh no, then it's they don't find it there. It can be one of these three locations, and whatever the PC sort of look the most, they find it, right? So you can do that pretty
Mm-hmm.
quickly. Add a little bit of flexibility in there. You can throw in like sort of like those sort of kick down the door events. This can happen at point A, B, or C, but it should happen in one of these points. And then and point C is sort of the desperation one, like when they're out of ideas, throw this event at them. No matter where they are, what happens, and then you can sort of it
Right.
does involve there's some things in pre-written adventures that do lean on the GMs to sort of have figure out, because they are meant to be kind of like good guidelines, really good structured skeletons for a GM to kind of, because we don't know GM's group. They might have some tie-ins they want to do to make the person's this character's brother this NPC, right?
Mhm.
And they can add whatever dialogue that might occur, right? We're not going to be able to write that, but yeah, mystery stuff is going to be a little trickier. But yeah,
Yeah.
writing, yeah, basically having a section where we say, here's what the person did, a timeline of events. Sometimes we'll do that too, right? Like if the PCs do nothing, the villain does this, and this, and then so the GM can kind of like know, like, oh, PCs missed all this other stuff. Well, at midnight, the NPC is in this location, and I can sort of steer the PCs to that location to get them there to see the final blood sacrifice or the second murder or something like that, right?
Right. Yoda ate my head asks a fun question. What if one of the players makes a deal with a demon and effectively becomes its pawn? I don't know why Yoda ate my head would ask that question. Actually, I know exactly why. Mark
Oh
Moreland
no, did that
had
happen?
yeah. There was a game I was running where the player characters had to survive a 4-stage gladiatorial fight in this underground city, and by winning this
Mm,
fight, the idea was that they would impress the rulers of the city and then be able to move forward in the storyline, and by impressing the rulers they would learn what the entrance, I think it was like where to go in the next dungeon level or something like that.
sure.
So they had to win this fight, and I set up the fight basically as 4 stages. The first one was like a super easy one where the player characters won automatically. The second one was supposed to be kind of a tough one. Third one was supposed to be a really tough one. And then the last one was
Hmm.
supposed to be sort of like a over the top one where there was going to be um, a revelation. I think that like one of the people they thought was their enemy was going to jump down into the fighting pit and help them out, and that would be the person that would then give them the next move they needed. Kind of help
Mm,
them escape. But the party rolled horribly in that third fight.
mm-hmm.
They kept rolling ones and twos and stuff like that. And all of a sudden, we were looking at a TPK with, I think, two of the player characters were unconscious. The party's cleric was, I think, held or something like that. Everybody except for Mark's character was out. And
Mm,
I knew that I had this plan of having somebody jump down and kind of save them. It's like, well, what I'm just going to have happen is once Mark takes his turn, and at the end of the round, I'm going to have this NPC jump in and save them, and then bust them out. And it just happens one battle round earlier. But Mark didn't know that, and
yeah.
and he wanted to save his party. So he basically went up to the final demon that they were fighting against in this fight, a treachery demon. It's a treachery demon, Mark. It's in the name. Um, and he basically said, "Hey, I'll be your minion if you save if you fight for me and basically help us break out of here." And that was delightful. So I think I handled that because demons are telepathic. So that whole thing happened in
Mhm.
like a case of where I took everybody aside and I gave like I think the three unconscious characters I had them have like weird visions and dreams. So they thought they were
Mhm,
being taken
mhm.
aside to get weird clues for the upcoming plot. Took Mark's character aside and was like, okay, yeah, that sounds good. um, there will be favors that you have to do later. And I told Mark as well, it's like, you're doing this of your own free will. And he's like, yep, I'm doing it. It's like, well, you're chaotic evil now, not chaotic neutral. So do with that as you will. And Mark, to his credit, just ran with it. He did a really fun job playing this. Like he was a more evil version than he was. He was already kind of evil character, but um,
Surprising.
and then this demon, Bezalak, was like, all right. And I didn't really have much of a plan in mind because I hadn't been thinking of this happening. But I was like, okay, well, at some point in the future, I will ask a favor of you type thing. And then the
Mhm,
adventure
yeah,
went
yeah,
on
yeah.
from there. The fun coda to that is that I was also at the time writing Demons Revisited. And that book was basically every demon gets this sort of entry. And then there was like a sample NPC. And I put Bezalak in as the treachery demon because and as it worked out, Mark Moreland was the one that ended up developing that book. And he got to that chapter, and it was all about how Bezalak does these things and all of his plots and plans for what happens if somebody says, yes, help me out. And so that was a fun sort of way to stealthily reveal to the player just how deep in it they got. Yeah, yeah. he did let you take assassin levels. That's true. So that was a fun time too. I mean, that's also a thing too. Is like sometimes the mysteries are things that the players bring to the table. You know, that
Oh
mystery
yeah.
there is like it's like the rest of the party is like, why did that demon suddenly become our friend? And there was I think for a while they were like worrying like, well, he's got plans for us, and we need to watch out for him. Maybe he's like uh, uh, got somebody mind controlled or something like that. And I don't know. I mean, Mark, let me know in chat if people. I think people eventually figured it out, but
Sure, yeah.
by the time people figured it out, it was like, oh, okay, we've known you've been evil this whole time. It's
Yeah.
cool. You stab things really good, so whatever.
I mean,
Um, yep,
there's nothing wrong with also like stopping a game for a minute and kind of talking to everyone as players, as people, and being like, "Hey, this is where this is going to go. You know, does anyone have any problems with this?" Kind of do a big check in, right? And I think most role players can kind of separate player knowledge from character knowledge in a lot of ways. So it is, you know, you just like, hey, look, we're gonna have this, and this is gonna feed into a plot that's gonna be fun, and maybe at some point you'll try to, you know, you'll get to break this contract or whatever. Or sometimes, like Mark just said, the campaign might just end anyway after a bit. But you know, I think just to get that buy-in. But you know, if your group is already sort of like on the same level and trust one another, you can sort of do it in secret. But also, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to sort of let everyone kind of know and be like, this is sort of the deal. You know, I feel like I've let people know that, like, or you know, do the scene out in front of everyone so that the players know, and it isn't necessarily secret. Secret stuff is fun, but you know, you don't necessarily want to foster a group environment where everyone is super paranoid and doesn't trust you or the GM, you know, the players or the GM. Honestly, so yeah, don't feel like you need to be super clever and super secret all the time because this is a game and we're not here to have fun.
yep, great
Yeah.
advice. Kitsune Warlock, do you have any fun advice for when players decide to just go to the cops, go to the authorities for solutions
Yeah.
rather than solve it yourself? Um, for me, that is usually one way I go with that is try to set it up so that it's the authorities who ask the player characters to figure it out in the first place. You know,
Yeah.
sort of
That's good.
set it up so that the solution needs to be done by somebody who's seventh level, like the party, and all of the authorities in town are fifth level.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so you can kind of set that up beforehand. But if it, I have had situations before where it's like, especially in Call of Cthulhu, where it's like, well,
Yeah.
we're the adventure thought that you were going to break into the mysterious house on the hill and search it for clues, and the whole adventure is written that way. But the player characters or the investigators at that point is like, we have enough evidence to just go to the cops.
Mm.
And I was like, you do? Do you want to do that? Um, you can do sort of reverse psychology. It's like, well, you could go to the cops, but it's interesting now that you think about it. Why haven't the cops done anything about solving this
Yeah.
situation in the first place? Go ahead and go to them though if you want. In a lot of cases, you can do that sort of thing, and people are like, oh no, we'll do it ourselves.
Uh-oh, yeah.
What do you think, Jason? Is there a way you can
Um,
to salvage a mystery when they go do something like that?
well, yeah, you make the cop, like you said, sort of make the cops part of the mystery. They either are like corrupt, like kind of what you're hinting at, or part of the whole thing, or like, okay, we go to the cops, we give them all this information about the spooky house on the hill. It's definitely haunted, right? And they believe you, or you tell them there's a murderer in there, so they go, and then you don't hear anything for like a day.
Yes, that.
Oh no, you just got the cops killed, basically, right?
Yep.
That's a great way. And then it comes like, oh well, I guess we did it. And I guess we're the only people who can go against the ghosts or beasts because we have the powers, and you know these town guards or whatever
Yep.
don't. So
Or
it's cruel, but yeah, it gets the job done.
they do come back and they're like, yeah, we searched it out. There's nothing there. I don't know what
Nothing
you're talking
there.
about. And then have the player characters make perception checks, and anyone makes it. It's like they're all blinking in unison. Like there's something going
Yes.
on. They,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, that is a little bit. You got to be flexible on that. You can change it away from like search the haunted house and to like track down who's mind controlling the police force type thing. But
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, so I think we've got a slow spot here in the questions. I actually have a question for you, Jason.
Oh, sure.
I know I've got my own choice here. Is there a game that you've run for any system that you
Mm.
presented a mystery that played out in a way you didn't anticipate that ended up being better than you thought it would be?
Ooh, okay, okay. I
If you got,
the
I can
most
go. If you cool.
give me a second. You tell me your story, and
Okay.
I'll sort of think about mine for a second.
All right. Cool. The one that I was just thinking about, it was a game I ran at PaizoCon many years ago, back when we did actual games in person before in
Hmm.
the before times. This was a Call of Cthulhu adventure, and I had the idea in my head was that the investigators are hired to go investigate this weird radio broadcast coming out of an abandoned military complex, kind of based on like these number station stuff. And the idea was that they would go in there, and there's this sort of time travel. Somebody's stuck in. There's like some sort of time something going on, and the player characters I had all these clues set out for them to
Mm.
investigate and all of that. And it was going pretty well. And I started just throwing in like, all right, people make it. Some people were making spot hidden checks and all that. Well, you see somebody run by, or you hear a voice say, "Don't go in there," or you do this, that, and the other
Mm.
thing. And I was kind of like, I had this weird idea along the way. It's like, oh, this could work out. And I started just taking notes about some of the things the player characters were doing, and I managed to set them up later in that session so their characters ended up running by that window or saying that exact phrase or
Oh
doing stuff so that they
no!
would slowly realize that when they were approaching this place, what they were seeing that they thought were ghosts was actually them in the future warning them not to come in here. And once
Oh
the party
wow!
figured that out, I had the monster attack, and I think it ended up being almost a TPK, and it worked out incredibly well. And I'm not sure exactly how I pulled it off, but it was not something that I was planning on doing. But it's a case where I saw this opportunity to do something really kind of fun, and
Yeah.
it worked out really perfectly. So it was tricky to pull off, but I think I'd seen some movie where I think it was Christopher Smith's Triangle has something like this where people are trying to warn
I was just talking
themselves in
about
the
that game.
past.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was
Um,
one for me that I thought worked out better than I thought it
that's a
would.
good one. I guess it's a bit of a mystery. Maybe not as creepy and mysterious as that, but and the reason this comes to mind is because it's something that I ran fairly recently. Everything past like 6 months ago, I can't quite remember. But it was it's a game called Court of Blades, and it's a sort of a Blades in the Dark hack that is a little more about sort of almost like French Revolution or not quite Regency, but the sort of like that revolutionary times, less than sort of the gritty fantasy. It's more Three Musketeers, Dumas kind of like adventures, right? But the group, it works for a sort of a noble house, and then you get sent on these adventures and mysteries and whatnot. And the one thing that I had that didn't turn out how I thought it would was that like, oh, there's a young man has come to town, and he's maybe got some wild magic in him that's sort of welling up and setting things on fire, and he doesn't know what he's doing. So you got to track him down and find him and figure out why that's happening, and maybe recruit him to the house, or if he's too gone too far gone and can't control his magic, maybe you have to kill him. But they found the kid. And they brought him back to their sort of base of operations where they were trying to do like they thought he was like haunted by a ghost or something, and it turns out he was more or less his mother was a witch that had been betrayed by another noble house in the family and then went out to live in the country, but he didn't know about all that. It was just this sort of like blood curse sort of welling up on him once he came back to the city, making him angry. And they tried all these things to sort of like essentially exorcise him. And I was like, oh yeah, you got to go get some silver thread, and just sort of I was kind of spinning at this point. I've been like, I wasn't expecting them to fully do an exorcism. I thought they were maybe just going to try to train him. But anyway, and so they found out, oh no, that was because his mother, and who his mother's paramour was, and how he's like probably like 70 now, and maybe figuring out that. But then the exorcism check critically failed.
Ooh,
And he's the young man. He started going, crazy. He was breaking out of like the circle of salt they kept him in, right? And then one of my other characters, one of the players, was like, he's playing this character who is basically like a revenant of sorts. Like, oh, he dies and comes back and whatever. He has a tragic history. He's like, oh, can I take the curse on? And I'm like, oh, yes, you can. You can do a thing, and you can take the curse into your body. And essentially, he did that, and then it's like, now you definitely want to go kill this lord. and it came to that, and they tricked him in such a way to come up to a top of a clock tower, and then sort of like, oh, you want to sneak up and stab him, and then he critically failed that roll, so he's like, forget it. I'm just going to grab him and push him out, and the two of us are going out of the clock tower together. And I was like, yes, it was a real dramatic ending to this scenario that I didn't think would have such a dramatic end.
Cool.
Ironically, that player couldn't play the next session, so I was like, you guys don't know where his body is when he hits the ground, because he probably could have survived that because he's come back to life again and again. And then so yeah, it was the Lord's body was there, and it was like, oh no, but your friend is gone, and I was like, I'm going to end it there for the night. So that was a fun sort of twist that again I didn't know where it's gone. That comes to my sort of like, yeah, a bit of improvisational GMing that I like to do.
Cool. Cool. We're coming up on out of time
Yeah.
for the panel, but before we go, Divine Highland asks a best Starfinder Pathfinder adventure to people to try, and I think I'm going to adjust that question a bit and talk about
Mm.
a good mystery themed adventure. For me,
Yes.
I'll do the Pathfinder one real quick and think of one for Starfinder there, Jason.
Sure thing.
For Pathfinder, it's one that I know about because I wrote it. It's Malevolence. It's a one-shot adventure for
Oh
level
yeah.
for fourth level characters. It's a haunted house adventure, and there's a whole bunch, just like with any haunted house. There's a whole sordid history about why this place has been haunted, and I really used a lot of the research rules from Game Mastery Guide in that one. So as you
Mm.
exploring this house, you can start, reading diaries and talking to ghosts and looking at paintings and doing all this research to figure out the mystery of why Zarwin Manor is haunted.
Mm-hmm.
And if you figure that mystery out, that will give you what you need to do to defeat this ghost. That if you don't know any of that information, the ghost is just going to destroy you. Fair warning:
Yeah.
that adventure is rough. It's intended to be a tough one. There's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cases where you're facing monsters that are maybe a little too tough for your group, and
Ooh.
that's part of the point of it being a horror adventure, where it's like it's okay to run away from the haunted house. You don't have to do the entire
Yes.
thing all at once. The haunted house is going to
Yeah.
be there tomorrow and the next day. But that's one I think that would be a good one for you, even if you just wanted to read it to see how we set up
Mm-hmm.
a method for even using dreams to untangle mysteries and all that. What about Starfinder side, maybe, Jason?
Again, I also have to plug something that I worked on, which is I think the threefold conspiracy adventure path is pretty good with lots of mysteries. It does, the first one. I can't say much because it's meant to be about unraveling all of these conspiracies, and it is meant to be this sort of like Matryoshka doll of weirdness and strangeness. It's got a little bit of like some X Files theming to it a little bit eventually, but most part it sort of starts off with this sort of seemingly quote unquote mundane mystery that can only really happen in a Starfinder adventure, honestly, since it takes place on a starship. But without revealing too much, I think just today actually, I did get a message saying that the ending of that first volume is blows PC's minds. Let's just say.
Nice. Actually,
Yeah.
I think Jason, you and I should recommend them play Gatewalkers because we both wrote to that adventure path,
Why?
and that's
Yeah,
all about
that's a
mysteries.
fun one too. That is all
Yeah,
about
that's all
mysteries and
filled with
figuring
mystery.
things out
Yeah,
and with
yeah,
weirdness.
good
I just
time.
like weirdness.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Well, thank you everybody for coming along on this magical
Mhm.
mystery tour of Pathfinder and Starfinder. Let us know, like in the feedback and all that, if these sort of genre type thing. Well, one of the ideas I had earlier was not just mystery, but whimsy in adventures.
Ooh,
How do you do an RPG where it's like everything's fun and happy and all of that? Um, Romance in RPGs is another one that can get interesting.
yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
But thanks again. Again, I'm James Jacobs. I'm the narrative creative director for Pathfinder. I'm a social media hermit, as I've been saying. But you can usually find me lurking around the boards at Paizo. I'm also pretty active on the Pathfinder 2e Reddit these days, and also
Mm.
have a Ask Me Anything thread over on the PaizoCon Discord, which is going to be up for a bit. I will continue answering questions there as long as it is around for people to ask questions of me.
Great. I'm Jason Keeley, senior developer for the Pathfinder Rules and Lore team. I am on Twitter. You can find my handle at the bottom of the screen there. And I also have an AMA on the PaizoCon Discord. Come ask me anything, although I think I'm going to be in the very next panel as well. So if you stick around and
Ooh,
watch some more of me, but I'll get to those questions later this afternoon.
Ooh, thanks for helping me talk about mysteries, Jason. Good times.
I loved it, James. Thanks for
Yay!
moderating for us.
Yep, no problem. Thanks, everybody.